Good afternoon. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. The Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality Assembly approved a motion on Wednesday to decrease the price of monthly transportation for university students, an election promise of the CHP's Ekrem İmamoğlu.
Imitating İmamoğlu. The opposition politician welcomed the news of price cuts on Wednesday, saying the decision of the municipality assembly was the result of his 18-day term as mayor. İmamoğlu's promise to his supporters that everything will be fine while speaking in the aftermath of the Supreme Election Board's decision to annul.
Joining us via Skype now to talk about the upcoming June 23rd redo elections in Istanbul is Can Selçuki, who is the director of Istanbul Economy Research. Good afternoon, Mr. Selçuki. Good to have you at This Week in Turkey.
Good afternoon.
So you recently wrote a piece for Foreign Policy magazine, and in the title you told us that these upcoming redo elections for Istanbul on June 23rd aren't mere mayoral elections, but this election will be one that will decide Turkey's future, rather. So what's the general picture on the road to this vital election?
First of all, the reason I describe this election not only as a mere mayoral election, but one of rather national significance is because it appears that Mr. Erdogan will be out on the field and he will be the actual opponent. It appears that he will be the actual opponent of Mr. İmamoğlu. He recently declared that he will be holding meetings in 39 districts of Istanbul. So it's fair to call this elections more than just a mayoral elections. Now, in the period going to the elections, there are a few drivers that will decide the outcome. Obviously, the strategy of the parties are that they will aim to keep their vote levels, the votes that they were able to get on March 31st, but also add new ones by means of mobilizing the non-voters. Because the non-voters were a big element of the elections, particularly because of the relatively low turnout. In June 24th elections, the turnout in Istanbul was 88.1%, whereas in March 31st it was around 83%. So both sides will try to mobilize these non-voters back to the ballots.
So, Mr. Selçuki, you've started talking about the non-voters, which constitute a very important part, let's say, in these upcoming elections. How do you expect the turnout to be this time? I mean, do you have any predictions about the turnout in comparison with March 31st? How will it be this time?
Well, first we have a total of 17% non-voters, but it's not realistic to expect that all of these non-voters will come to vote. But I expect this time around 89–90% participation level in the Istanbul rerun. And the way we come to this figure is we did a simulation whereby the hypothesis, the assumption is that if in the neighborhoods where turnout was lower than June 24th, if the turnout levels go back to the level of June 24th, what would change, what would happen? And that puts us at around 89–90% turnout, voter turnout level, which I believe is a realistic scenario going forward.
And what do we know so far about the election strategies of parties, of the AKP and the CHP specifically? What have you observed so far?
It appears, well, first of all, it's a bit too early to call because we have some glimpses of what their strategy is likely to be, but we haven't seen them actually with this new strategy. Let's start with our party side. As I said in the beginning, it appears that Mr. Erdogan will roll up his sleeves and be actually the main driver force between the AK Party, behind the AK Party campaign. And he will make this elections more, I think, about himself than the local promises. One reason behind this is because the gap between the support for AK Party and Erdogan is increasing. whereby AK Party is Mr. Erdogan is keeping his levels, but AK Party is sliding further down. So he wants to make this about a vote for him and not particularly a vote for AK Party. Now on the CHP side, or the opposition side, the opposition decided not to hold any meetings during this campaign. So they don't want to intimidate the other side, the voters of Mr. Binali Yıldırım. And a couple of days ago, head of Istanbul chapter of CHP, Ms. Kaftancıoğlu, announced that they have a strategy whereby one by one they will reveal what they have found out during Mr. İmamoğlu's short period as the mayor of Istanbul. So it appears to me that they will base their campaign more on what happened after the election until he got his mandate, and also the achievements that he has made in the short period of time that he was the mayor, but also, I believe, some inconsistencies that they have discovered while he was the mayor. But again, we haven't seen the strategies unfold just yet. I think it will become more clear next week.
You've just suggested that President Erdogan has made this election about himself rather than their candidate Binali Yıldırım. So let's try to take it from there right now. Opposition candidate İmamoğlu chose the phrase "everything will be," the Turkish phrase for "everything will be all right" for his redo election campaign. And Erdogan's response to this slogan was "everything will be better," which is very noticeably a version of İmamoğlu's slogan, if not an imitation. So what does this similarity tell us about the strategy of the AKP, or let's not call it the AKP, but the strategy of Erdogan?
First of all, I think it's a bit premature to call that AK Party's slogan, particularly because it was a very ad hoc thing that just popped up right there. I mean, he was riding the tram on İstiklal, and somebody approached a scenario very similar to Mr. İmamoğlu, a young boy shouting "Ekrem abi, everything will be very good." I don't think it's their slogan. It's just something that came up at that point. I don't think they will keep it up. So I feel like the opposition and the general public are reading too much into that. I mean, it was just a spontaneous event, and he just responded that way. But that doesn't mean that it's going to be the slogan of AK Party. Now, obviously, the main difference between the two slogans is that for CHP, for the opposition, it was produced very organically. It happened very spontaneously. And that's why actually it helped. I mean, it was very, it was very natural. Again, for AK Party, I don't think that's a slogan, and I feel like we are reading too much into it.
All right, in that case, let's move our focus away from words and back on numbers. So the opposition, let's turn to the opposition now. They seem pretty confident that they will win once again, and they even claim that they will win with an even greater difference, a difference of 10% they talk about. Where do you think this confidence comes from in the opposition, and what do your predictions suggest? What do the numbers say to us so far?
Well, the optimism in the opposition obviously comes from a kind of energy that hasn't been there for a long time. If you go back to the presidential elections, the CHP base was again energized by Mr. İnce's performance, but soon after the elections, it turned out that the organization wasn't well done, and CHP accepted defeat rather quickly. This time around, that did not happen. For the first time in a long, long time, the opposition was well prepared, did their homework, and this is what people got very hopeful. Now, although Mr. İmamoğlu does have a chance of winning, yes, but I find the assessments that say he will win by a great margin, I think those assessments do not really reflect the truth. On the other end, on the other side of the aisle, we also see a lot of assessments saying that, if our party decided a re-election, then it must be that they have a plan. and that they will win comfortably. I also don't agree with this assessment. Our numbers actually tell us that this will again be a very, very tight race. And the numbers behind this, the reason behind this assessment is this. Now, as I said, both parties will try to keep the votes that they got already, and it appears that to much extent they will be able to do this. But let's look at the new sources of votes, new channels where they might acquire new votes. And when we look at those, when we look at, for example, neighborhoods that have lower turnout than June 24th, it appears that the two candidates have very similar potential new votes. So this tells us that the race will be again very tight. There are two factors that play in advantage of Mr. İmamoğlu, and they are that one, Saadet Party has decided to join the election, and this is important because Saadet voters, even if they're not too happy with the current government or current practices, it's very difficult for them to go vote for a CHP candidate. So, and they have they received around 130,000 votes in March 31st. So that's one element that works in favor of Mr. İmamoğlu. Second one is TKP and the three independent candidates conceded from the race. The Democratic Left Party, although the headquarters said that they will not be backing any particular candidate, they also said that they will not be nominating anyone. So historically, the Democratic Left Party base is more likely to go and vote for Mr. İmamoğlu than Mr. Yıldırım. So it appears that A, their new sources of votes are very close to each other, and B, it appears that all these small parties and independents seem to work in favor of Mr. İmamoğlu, giving him a head start, although not too much.
Mm-hmm. So do you think these numbers add up in favor of İmamoğlu?
They do, but again, he has a slight head start, yes, but it's going to be a tight race. Mm-hmm. We're not going to see, at least the assessment that I would make today, still more than a month until the elections. From where we stand right now, it appears that it's going to be a very tight race.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Mr. Selçuki, let's try to conclude by shedding some light on one of the puzzles that we face ahead of these elections, which is the puzzle of Kurdish voters. Actually, we could call it two puzzles, the first one being Kurdish voters and the second being nationalist voters, the MHP's voter base. The MHP, which is currently in an alliance with the AKP in these elections, just like they were in the previous ones that were annulled. So in a move this week, which is thought to be a gesture to the Kurdish voters, the government announced that they will be lifting the ban on PKK leader Öcalan and his lawyer visits. But at the same time, as I've just said, the AKP is currently in an alliance with the nationalist movement party, MHP. So do you think this gesture, quote unquote, by the government to Abdullah Öcalan will have an impact on the decision of the MHP voters this time? How will it affect the nationalist voters, and what sort of an impact do you see for Kurdish voters?
It may have an impact, but not by a significant amount, and there are two reasons to that. One, after the High Election Board decision on May 6th, HDP was one of the first parties to make a statement that their position will not change and that they deemed the decision unlawful. And it was a very clear statement, and they have kept that stance until now. The second factor is, of course, what's happening in the southeast mayor-elects, whereby some of the mayors were not given their mandates because of ongoing trials. Now, maybe a third factor is that it appears that Mr. Demirtas is still has different views than Öcalan. So I don't see how a small gesture as such having a big impact on HDP voters. And it's important to note that unlike, let's say, the Southeast, HDP support here is not exclusively Kurdish citizens, citizens of Kurdish origin. As for MHP votes, we have already seen some MHP voters voting for Mr. İmamoğlu on March 31st. One trend was that they tended to vote for their party or for the alliance between our party and MHP in the district elections and voted for Mr. İmamoğlu in the metropolitan elections. Now there are no district elections, so I'm not sure if that trend will continue. But it's also a fact that some of the things that Mr. İmamoğlu has done during his short time as mayor of Istanbul might appeal to MHP voters, of course, if they're communicated correctly. But in the bottom line, I think that MHP voters are not that far to Mr. İmamoğlu. I mean, they are really distant to CHP, yes, but I think personally towards Mr. İmamoğlu, I don't find them to be too distant from the candidate. I don't know if that will materialize as voting behavior.
Thank you very much, Can Selçuki, for being with us today and for your comments.
Yes.
Today we were joined by Can Selçuki, and he commented on and he shared his predictions for the upcoming June 23rd redo elections in Istanbul. And now we'll continue with our next news video. A war of words erupted this week between President Recep Tayyip Erdogan and Tuncay Özilhan, the president of Turkey's leading business association, TÜSİAD. Following Özilhan's criticism of the government, Erdogan said that those trying to hit Turkey from within will be called to account.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan snapped against Tuncay Özilhan, the leader of Turkey's leading business union, TÜSİAD, at an iftar dinner held with Homeland Security personnel in Ankara on Thursday. Özilhan, the owner of the Anadolu Group conglomerate and one of Turkey's most influential businessmen, harshly criticized the government for its handling of the Istanbul elections on Wednesday. Our central bank reserves are evaporating. The people's purchasing power is diminishing. Turkish citizens are abandoning the lira. Turkey's blood is being shed in global competitiveness, Özilhan said of the recent economic situation in Turkey. Even despite our history of coups, our democracy always worked. We always return to democracy, Özilhan added. Özilhan also drew attention to dismal figures on Turkey's labor market and said the lack of an independent judiciary and poor record of press freedom had contributed to Turkey's stalling economy. Erdogan, in response, said that Özilhan's speech was full of an indigestion of democracy and accused him of trying to blacken Turkey's name. Erdogan finished the iftar speech by saying there were many foreign enemies looking to attack Turkey, but that he knew how to hold accountable those inside the country.
The Turkish Statistical Institute announced on Wednesday that Turkey's unemployment rate rose by 4.1% in February on a yearly basis, reaching 14.7%.
Turkey's unemployment rate stood at 14.7% in February this year, the country's statistical authority announced on Wednesday. Turkish Statistical Institute, TÜİK, said the unemployment rate rose by 4.1 percentage points on a yearly basis. The number of unemployed aged 15 years and older increased by 1.37 million year-on-year to 4.73 million in February. In the same period, non-agricultural unemployment rate occurred at 16.9%, TÜİK said, reporting an increase of 4.4 percentage points. While youth unemployment rate, including persons aged 15 to 24, was 26.1% with 7.1 percentage point increase, the unemployment rate for persons aged 15 to 64 occurred as 15% with 4.1 percentage point increase, the institute added. In January, the country's unemployment rate was also 14.7% with 4.67 million unemployed persons aged 15 years and above, making a 3.9 percentage point annual rise. Meanwhile, Turkey's current account deficit has dropped to $589 million in March, decreasing by $4.14 billion compared to the same month in 2018, the Central Bank of Turkey said on Monday. The figure was nearly $4.73 billion in March 2018, according to the central bank's data. This development in the current account is mainly attributable to a $3.7 billion decrease in the goods deficit, recording net outflow of $916 million, the bank said in its report. On the other hand, Treasury and Finance Minister Berat Albayrak said on Sunday that Turkey's economy will prosper as employment levels increase and inflation rates are expected to sharply drop. Turkey will have reached a more poised and decent point at the end of 2019, especially in inflation and unemployment. We are entering a period where employment will increase even more, said Albayrak, speaking on a television program. According to the figures Albayrak has provided, based on social security registrations, at least 520,000 more people became employed in March and April. Turkey has gone through tough times, yet the end is coming closer step by step. The light at the end of the tunnel becomes brighter, he said.
Senior U.S. lawmakers introduced a resolution in the House of Representatives on Wednesday, expressing concern over U.S.-Turkey relations and calling for the cancellation of Ankara's F-35 fighter jet purchases if it acquires Russia's S-400 missile defense system.
On Tuesday, U.S. House of Representatives Appropriations Committee released an early version of a spending bill that seeks to prevent the shipment of F-35 jets to Turkey. The measure would not allow any spending, for example, for fuel or pilots to fly the aircraft to Turkey. It is too early to tell when, if ever, this F-35 measure might become law. To pass, the appropriations bill must pass the House of Representatives and the Senate. The bill also must be signed into law by Trump. Lawmakers in both chambers have previously sought to block the F-35 sale as standalone bills, and the Trump administration has already suspended the F-35 delivery. Current spending bill for fiscal year 2019 bans their delivery until the State Department submits a report on mandatory Russia-related sanctions that would be triggered by the S-400 sale. The report is due between July and November. Like other NATO allies of Washington, Turkey is both a prospective buyer and a partner in production of the F-35. But US officials have said Turkey's plan to buy the Russian system would compromise the security of the Lockheed Martin F-35 jets. The dispute has strained relations between Washington and Ankara.
Istanbul football club Galatasaray beat Akhisarspor 3-1 to win the Turkish Cup on Wednesday.
Akhisarspor, which has already been relegated from the Turkish Super League, broke the silence in the 56th minute with Elvis Manu finding the net at 4 Eylül Stadium in the central Anatolian province of Sivas. Galatasaray's goals came from Sinan Gümüş in the 80th minute, Sofiane Fegoli in the 88th minute, and Mbaye Diagne in the 90th minute. Akhisar's Miguel Lopez received a red card in the 78th minute. Galatasaray's Diagne also